If your creative push has helped you, you can help the show by shopping on Amazon.com. All you have to do is head to yourcreativepush.com/Amazon. That will take you right there, and you can shop how you normally would. A small percentage of your purchases will go directly to helping cover the costs of creating, hosting, and maintaining your creative push. And especially with the holidays coming up, you can make a big difference just by buying the things you were going to anyway. Again, that's yourcreativepush.com/Amazon, and thank you for thinking of the show and for helping out. Your Creative Push, episode 267.
If you love what you do, enjoy life, and enjoy doing what you want to do, you're going to make a success no matter what you do.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Matthew Mungle. Matthew is an American makeup artist who has been nominated 4 times for the Academy Award for Best Makeup, and he won in 1992 for Bram Stoker's Dracula. The other nominations were Schindler's List, Ghosts of Mississippi, and Albert Nobbs. But he has been a part of a ton of other projects: American History X, The Lost World, Jurassic Park, Fast and the Furious, The X-Files. I'm just cherry picking a couple of the ones that just really stood out to me, but he's been a part of over 200 film and television projects. But he comes on the show today to share a little bit of his story, a little bit of his creative journey for your listening pleasure. And he talks about how he initially became interested in makeup effects and some of his initial inspirations, some of the movies that really inspired him, as well as Richard Corson's stage makeup book. He dives into the experience of moving to Los Angeles in his early work in film and working with the likes of Tim Burton, Frank Oz, and many of the early films that he worked on, including The Guardian, Edward Scissorhands, and one of my personal favorites, What About Bob? He also talks about the experience of winning the Academy Award and then how he took on the Oscar curse moving on with his career. He also talks about some of the creative resistances that he's had to deal with in his career and the change that occurred in his work and his career after he stopped working from home. He also talks about learning to delegate and maintaining a professional relationship with actors and actresses, with all of the time, the intimate time that you spend with them. And he shares some of his advice to younger creative people, his 60-40 rule, as well as his advice to always learn from your mistakes. I had an awesome time talking with Matthew. His resume runs deep, but he is an extremely humble guy and an extremely passionate guy. So I really hope you do enjoy my conversation with Matthew Mungle. Matthew, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here, man. You're kind of a legend in the industry. You've worked on over 200 film and television projects, like all of which I know. So it's really a pleasure to have you on here. Before we get into kind of all of your work that you've done, I was wondering maybe you could start at kind of the beginning and tell us how you got to this point.
Well, at 11 years old, I started a love for makeup effects. Of course, it wasn't called makeup effects at that time. It was just called makeup. I started out watching old monster movies on television, Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, and I was just fascinated by how those actors I didn't understand it really. Is that a real person or is that an actor in makeup? And then in 1965, Seven Faces of a Dr. Lao came out, and I saw that, and I was just, again, fascinated by how Bill Tuttle turned Tony Randall into all those characters. And I saw pictures of him doing it, and I was just amazed. And then in 1968, Planet of the Apes came out, and that was all she wrote. That was my definitive, the lightning bolt came off and I want to do that. So I bought a book called Richard Corson's Stage Makeup, and I just scoured through it. And also I picked up a magazine called Famous Monsters, Making a Monster, or something like that. And it was by Dick Smith, and it was step by step of how you do different creatures and how you use makeup. And that was just like my Bible to me, those two books. And I learned off of that started doing it on my own. And then about 1972, I did a makeup of a Planet of the Apes, and I showed it to the daughter of the owner of the theater, the movie theater in my town. Remember, I was raised in Atoka, Oklahoma, on a farm, population 4,000. So,
Right.
it was a small town.
You knew everybody.
So, yeah. So her dad called me up one night and said, can you make yourself up and come down and promote the show that's playing? And at that time, it was like Escape from the Planet of the Apes or one of the ape movies. I said, sure. So I got up at 5:00, put the makeup on, and showed up at 8:00 at the theater. And he had made a sign, and he was amazed at how I had made myself up. And I walked around town all day with that makeup on, not saying a word to anybody. Nobody knew who I was. It was the first time I felt like, wow, this is how it is to have makeup on and become a character. So again, I was hooked on that part also. So he gave me a job there promoting the shows that came in, and I made myself up and made costumes and everything. And then once I graduated from Atoka High School, I went to OSU and majored in theater. At that time, I already had a big portfolio of what I'd done during my high school years. So the professors in the theater department immediately put me to work doing props, makeup. I was just immersed in it. I just love that. I think my other classes failed miserably because I was always at the theater doing stuff.
Right.
And then I only went there for 2.5 years. And then I moved to Hollywood in December of 1977, already having been enrolled in Joe Blasco Makeup Center. And I went there, started the school in February of that year, and graduated in May. And that's the first time in my life I was like a sponge, absorbing everything I could from that education, because it was, it was what I wanted to do. It was my profession. I guess I'm pretty lucky in that stage of life, knowing what I want to do, because I knew what I wanted to do. I still love it, and it's so creative. And then after I graduated from Joe Blasco Makeup Center in May of 1978, I started working in the industry, and Joe Blasco also put me to work teaching at the school, which reinforced everything I had learned there. And I just started working at small jobs here and there, and I got connected with Jeff O'Brow and Steve Carpenter at UCLA, and we worked on The Dorm That Dripped Blood, a classic, horror film.
Nice.
And just doing blood and gore. And then they did another movie and another movie. So I was always there for them. And then I think it was like 1984, we did The Kindred. And I kind of moved to LA at the beginning of the special makeup effects craze. And that was the time that phrase was coined at that time. I just started working on all these films, and The Kindred was one of those films that I could just come up with all these designs and characters, and they were like, oh yeah, that's perfect. We'll do this, and we'll shoot at slow speed. Or it was one of those times of getting young people together and just being creative. I think it's a little easier today with all the technology we have, but in those days, it was all film and there's no digital work to be done. So it was on my shoulders to come up with everything. And then in 1989, before that, I worked on War Party, department heading the makeup on the movie, War Party, Split Decision. That was 1987. And then 88, I worked on a bigger budget film called Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, where I made some prosthetic leg appliances for Steve Martin for the scene where Michael Caine hits him over the legs, the shins, with a stick. And if your viewers haven't seen that movie, they should watch that movie. It's a very funny movie, and directed by Frank Oz and
nice.
And a producer named Bernie Williams, who I became very good friends with, and we ended up working on about 10 projects together. It's such a great producer and great guy that I knew in my life. And then Frank Oz was just amazing. And we got along so well. And I, of course, every time he would talk or say anything on the set, there was Miss Piggy. You turn around and go, oh, God, there's Yoda or Miss Piggy. Oh, I'm living a dream,
Yeah.
And then cut to 1990, and V. Neal called me up and needed somebody to come down and help her with Edward Scissorhands. And I said, of course, I'm there. But before that, I worked on a movie called The Guardian with William Friedkin, of course, one of my idols. Also working on, seeing The Exorcist when I was still in high school and just being scared out of my mind with that movie.
Terrifying.
But working with William Friedkin was really a great experience because he was always pushing me to do better and do different things. We would do an effect on the set just as a test, and he'd go, "Oh, that's horrible. Go back and do it again. Redo it." And you're high as a kite and then low as you could get. And then the next time you do it on the set, it's great. It's perfect because he wanted you to perfect it. So, that was, The Guardian. And then after The Guardian, I worked on a movie called Navy SEALs, where we went to Virginia and Spain, with Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn and a lot of the guys in the movie, and I department headed that movie. And right after that, I worked on Edward Scissorhands with V. Neal, and that was a really great experience. At that time, I got in the union. I had actually got my hours on The Guardian to get into the union. I had to fly back while we were shooting Edward Scissorhands and take my test in L.A. But shooting Edward Scissorhands in Florida with V and Tim Burton was just amazing. Working on a film like that it was just so up tempo. Everybody liked each other. It was just wonderful. And then later that year in 1990, I worked with Frank Oz again on What About Bob? I was very fortunate in my life to work with some really great people. And Frank Oz was one. And every time I'd work with him, we'd have a great time. The set would be fun, even though Richard Dreyfuss and Bill Murray didn't necessarily get along on that film. It was a great experience, and I really had a great time, even though I was just department heading the makeup on the show. I didn't really have any special makeup to do, but working with Richard Dreyfuss was great because we reconnected a couple more times on a couple more projects. And then, the rest is history, all of the other films, and all at once 1991 came up, and I was fortunate enough again to work with Greg Canham and Michelle Burke on Bram Stoker's Dracula. And that was freaking amazing.
Yeah, that's the big one.
The sets were great. The makeups were great. I would help Greg put the makeup on every day, or I'd put them on myself if Greg wasn't available. And working with Gary was just a treat. I mean, he was just such a consummate professional, and it was just a great experience. And I think we did a pretty good job because
I think so too.
We were nominated for an award and won. So that was knock on wood. And I never started my career out thinking, I'm going to win an Academy Award. That's what I'm trying to. I just did it because I love this profession. And I think, your viewers should realize, especially the young ones, if you really love what you do and enjoy life and enjoy doing what you want to do, you're going to make a success no matter what you do, because you point yourself in that direction and it's a positive thing in your life.
Right.
So, I did that, and I was fortunate enough to be honored with an Academy Award. And then a few years later, I was nominated again for Schindler's List, where I designed the ball caps for the shower scene in that film. I think after Schindler's List, I started working with gelatin, and because it was so translucent and I could do so much with it as makeups. Up until then, foam latex was used, and about that time, silicone was kind of going around the industry, but it just wasn't there to use for appliances. So gelatin was the next step after foam latex, which is more opaque, but gelatin's more translucent and lifelike. However, it has its down points in that if the set is really hot or wet or humid, it would melt on an actor's skin, especially if it was hot or humid. So it had its downfalls, but it really looked good when it was on. And I had an opportunity to work with James Woods again after working with him on Citizen Cone for HBO. And it was a movie called The Ghost of Mississippi, and aging him to look like Byron D. LeBeckwith in the film. And I thought it was a great time to use gelatin. Well, I did. Going to Mississippi and doing the makeup in a hot and humid, really humid climate was not really easy. There were times that it was melting on his face, and I'd have to make it work and get through the scene. And luckily we had a great DP, John Seal, who was amazing with who I'd worked with on The Doctor also. And he was just great working with backlighting with the makeup and really turning the makeup into a nice makeup, something I had done. Of course, at that point, visual effects wasn't there to clean up your work. So you really had to do your work precisely. And we did a pretty good job because we got a nomination out of that. So that was pretty good. And then, cut to a few years ago, I worked with, Glenn Close and Janet McTeer on Albert Nobbs. And that was another great experience in that Glenn Close had this project that she'd held on to for about 20 years. And she wanted to make it into a film. Of course, they barely got the money together, and it was an $8 million project, and they shot it in Dublin, Ireland. But it was a chance for me to really excel at what I really enjoy doing, which is very subtle prosthetics, doing a nose, changing the facial structure from within, using dental plumpers inside the mouth. Changing the ears, making her earlobes longer, plumping her ears out. And of course, Marcel did an amazing wig for her that made her look like a man. And luckily enough, I was nominated for another Academy Award for that. Didn't win, but I was nominated, and that's a great honor from your peers.
And I wanted to ask you about
yes,
that specific project too, for anybody listening that that's Albert Nobbs.
Yes.
And does that kind of a project terrify you? Because I mean, it's a big task to kind of take on to transform like Glenn Close and Janet McTeer into men essentially. And especially knowing that I didn't know that was a project that Glenn Close had kind of held on to. So it's obviously very personal to her and very important to her. And it's kind of like you're almost like one of the main characters. Like you are that movie because you're so integral into kind of that storyline. So does a project like that ever kind of terrify you? Well,
it does a little bit, but at the same time, you have some great people. Bonnie Curtis was Glenn Close's producer on it. And she is so sweet, so nice. And then you have Glenn Close, who really wants to do this project. And you become entrenched with these people. And it's like a collaborative effort through all of you, joining in and having a meeting and saying, okay, let's do this. And I'm always about subtlety, and on that project, it really hit home because that's what she wanted to do. She wanted it to be very subtle. And I said, let's not put any makeup on your face. And she said, I love that. So she was into it from the get-go. She wanted it to work. She wanted to become that character. And it's a project like that I strive for later in my life now, is to work with people who really want to work with you and really want to do a great project or a great job on a project. And if you feel that they're a positive light in your life and that they want you to do good and want to work with you and not working against you, then you're going to give your all. And that's exactly what I did. It was like a labor of love for us.
Right, and like a different kind of challenge. Because I was
Completely.
also going to ask, I was also going to ask, like, if it ever gets like repetitive with. You're talking about earlier about, like, starting out kind of having that like experimentation and like there not being like kind of like a standard way to do things. And I was wondering if, like, once you kind of like master that idea of like molding an actor's face and making the silicone faces or ears or noses or whatever you might need, like does it ever get repetitive, or like do you still find ways to like innovate?
Not at all. Every person's face is different. And no matter if you took a nose from one actor and put it on another actor, it would be completely different because the facial structures are different. The eyes are different. The cheekbones are different. The mouth is different. So it never gets repetitive. I mean, we all have our standard tricks in the book, kind of things we go for, but it never gets repetitive, and there's always a new way to do something and an old way that might come into play when you're doing a makeup. So it's always changing. And even later in my life, I find projects that I really, really want to work on if they want to work with me. And if they don't, and I just feel I have this sixth sense about projects when I go into it. And if it doesn't start out right, or I don't feel good talking to people, or not a positive feedback from them, I don't want to have anything to do with it, because it's all about being creative and being yourself and being a collaborative effort, not one person saying, I want it done this way and you're going to do it this way. Otherwise I'll get somebody else. And that's not what you want. You want it to be, it's a creative process. So you want it to be positive.
Yeah, it's like going back to all the way in the beginning when you were talking about, getting that Richard Corson stage makeup book and kind of teaching yourself. And that's something that I encourage people to. It's like, listening to this interview, if somebody wanted to get into it, like you have such like a kind of a storied history and you have so much experience, and like the gap between somebody who's never done something like that or somebody who's never done any type of creative thing that they want to get into, that there's this huge gap. But it really is just as easy as like diving in and self-teaching, you know what I mean? Grabbing that book and experimenting and using that excitement to like kind of spur you forward. Yeah.
It's all about that. And there are so many tutorials on YouTube. There are so many books out now. There is no excuse for a creative person not to get into it. Now, there is this thing about psychology being a makeup artist, because if you're working on a project, you're the first person the actor sees in the morning. You're usually the first person on the set or in the trailer. Your call is earlier than anybody else, and you're there all day, and you're the last person the actor sees at the end of the day. So you have to be upbeat. You have to listen to the actor. You have to know when the actor wants to talk, and know when you got to shut up and listen. So sometimes I take the analogy that 60% is working with people, listening and being kind and doing your job. And 40% is your talent, because it's very important to work with a person and get into the project rather than constantly fighting or whatever on a project.
Absolutely. Well, I also wanted to get back to the Academy Award, if you don't mind.
Not a problem.
so I'm a poker dealer, and in poker there's this thing called free rolling where like you
Uh-huh.
can get into a hand where like you can only win, like
Uh-huh.
you can't lose, like you could either like tie or win. So did you kind of have that kind of a feeling of like free rolling, like you've kind of hit this accomplishment and now like moving forward it's just kind of like all you can do is win?
No, not at all. Because
Awesome.
I had, before winning the Academy Award for Bram Stoker's Dracula, I had heard the Oscar curse. In other words, it's you win an Oscar. After that, everything that you take, everything that you do is kind of, you better not take it for granted because it changes within an instant. So you need to constantly strive to do better. Sometimes there's analogy that that Oscar and $1 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, you know, because yeah, it's an honor, but it's that project. Now, what are you going to do? You know, how are you going to up yourself? And you're constantly trying to do better and get better projects. Yes, the Oscar brings you a little bit more higher prestige, and the projects might start coming in more, but it's still how you work with people and what you do, how your artistic ability is. And one of my changes through my life have been, at the beginning of my career, I was always working by myself, maybe having one assistant, but doing everything in the lab. And after Bram Stoker's Dracula, I worked on Citizen Cone. And at that time, up until that time, 1991, 92, I was working in my garage at my house. And I had no matter if I had a new house or whatever, I'd always set up a lab in the garage. And after Citizen Cone in 1992 with James Woods, I set up my own lab. I rented a space. My partner and I, John Jackson, rented a space in North Hollywood, and we were frightened, but he wanted to get it out of the house. I kind of was bucking at that because, you know, you can get up and just walk out to it. But at the same time, getting up, showering, and then going to work out of your house is another experience. And I'm kind of a creature of habit too. So when that came around, it was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But once I did that, it was another whole experience in my life. Then I started taking on bigger projects. I had to take on more employees, and I had to learn to let go of some of my idiosyncrasies and my demands of myself and put that onto others and go into a supervisor mode rather than actually doing it, because I would get up until, in 1995, I worked on Natural Born Killers, right after I'd worked on Heaven and Earth with Oliver Stone. And after working on Natural Born Killers and being the department head, doing all the makeup effects on the show, I decided, you know, I don't want to sit on the set every day and do this. I want to run a lab. I can be more creative. I can get 2 or 3 more jobs at a time and work in the lab, creating stuff and doing this project and then jumping over to this project and having people work with me and being creative and making creative space for artists. And it was another step in my career. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made, because either as a makeup artist, you're on the set, department heading, you're doing your own thing, or you're a lab owner and you create, make the molds, make the characters, and then send it to the set, or go to the set and do it, instead of getting pieces from a lab and applying it on the set. So I was just upping my game at that point. I think I was always destined to have my own lab and create my own thing in this career. So I always had to let go of certain things and let people do it. But now that I'm kind of semi-retired now, I'm getting back to that, doing it myself, and that's, I did Salem a couple of years ago for 3 seasons. And Lee Grimes and I were in the makeup effects trailer. We had a makeup effects trailer in Shreveport, Louisiana. And we were always making everything for the show. We'd go to meetings, we'd find out what they needed, and then order the supplies we needed and make it in the trailer. And it was getting back to my roots of what I really wanted to do. And I had forgotten about that because I'd owned a lab for 20 years, and I was only supervising, maybe going to the set occasionally, putting on a piece or something, or if I saw a project I really wanted to do, I'd do it. But getting back on the set and doing makeup effects on a set and doing, again, working with people that you want to work with and that enjoy having you there is a great positive thing.
So when you were like delegating that much for so long, did it feel like more like a business than like the kind of like the creativity
Totally.
was taken away a little bit? Yeah.
Totally. And, having to worry about the next project, having to worry about paying. I mean, a lot of people say, well, what wakes you up at night? What frightens you? I said, well, making payroll the next week frightens me more than anything that
Right.
I would create, blood or whatever, in effect. It's like, you pay your employees before you pay yourself. So, it was a nice while it lasted, but I'm glad to be away from it now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, kind of going along with that, with all like taking on multiple things.
Yeah.
And so I guess this is kind of a question about balancing time, but also like what drives you to do so many projects? Because you had we haven't even talked about CSI yet, but I mean, that was how many seasons?
I worked on it for 10 seasons. It went for 16.
Right.
It went for 16, and I worked on it for, let's say I joined it in the 5th season. So
Right.
it's about 11 seasons I worked on it.
So you had that going on for 11 seasons, but then you're also taking on tons of other projects and even doing like stuff on Broadway, like for Wicked. So
Yes.
like with all that going on, like how did you find the time and also like kind of find the drive to keep you like taking on all these different things?
Well, that's all I did. That
Right.
makeup was my life, and I'd work 7 days a week, and I had a big crew. At one point, I'd have 20 people working with me in
Wow.
the lab. And, of course, the lab grew and grew, and we went from rental space to buying our own place in 1995, and et cetera. And you just have to be organized. That's the bottom line. Take lots of notes. Know who you're speaking to. There were a couple of times, and only a couple of times, that people would call that we're working on a project, and they'd start out in the conversation, and I'd be thinking, what freaking project is this? Oh my God. Okay. And then they'd say something and it would key in. Okay, great. Okay, I'm on board. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, we've got that, and we'll have it done in a couple of days. And
It's like keeping up with like an affair, like keeping up with all your lies.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, tell me about it. But I thrived on it. I really enjoyed it. It was stressful, but at the same time, it was always creative. And I think one of the hardest things doing all those projects is getting all my artists who are working with me to work on the same page. Because as artists, you want to do your own thing here and there. And there's that effect of the kindergarten effect is, well, he said something to me and I don't like that. I just, at one point I took 2 of my employees that had this bickering going on and brought them into the conference room, and I just screamed at them. I said, you guys, better work this out, or both of you going to be fired. And I went out, slammed the door, and just let them stay in there and work their differences out, because I couldn't have that in my work, not with everything going on, and we'd have morning meetings of what's going on, what we need to do. We'd always have a to-do list every day. So at the end of the day, no matter what time it was, I'd make a list for the next day. And then I got to the point that I'd need an assistant to help me, a coordinator. And then I need a receptionist. And then I need all of this. And it just grew and grew and grew. And at one point you just go, I can't do this anymore, after 20 years of doing it. It was, hey, knock on wood, it was great. It was wonderful. I wouldn't change a thing about it, but it becomes a grind. And as you get older, you go, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
But while I was doing it and I did it in the perfect time of my life, it was perfect. And it was great working on several projects at a time, because I could pick and choose. I could say, well, I want to do that project, but I don't necessarily want to go to the set and apply that makeup. So I'm going to get another makeup artist to go and apply it, or I'll go in with them and apply it, and I'll leave them on the set because I got to go back to the lab and do the other project, or get something else done for that project. So it was a constant rotating door. And because I worked so many hours early in my life and would get things done down to the wire and have to spend, stay up for 22 hours, I learned to coordinate my life and to coordinate my schedule. And, I promised myself that when I opened a lab, we would work maybe 10 hours a day, but that was it. And then I got it down to 8 hours a day. We come in at 7 a.m. and we have an hour lunch and we leave at 4. Yeah, there's days that you have to work an hour overtime or something like that, or a Saturday, but you have to get it done, and you have to be there for your artists to go, okay, I need this done by noon, because we've got to go on to the next stage. And it's just management and coordinating and thinking about keeping the producers and the directors happy, and luckily that all worked out. So
yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Well, kind of speaking of that, and like working with like a lot of younger people, would you have any kind of advice or like a common thing, maybe theme that you saw through a lot of the young people, something that they struggled with, or something that anybody listening now, advice that you could kind of reach through and give to them as they like kind of start their creative process?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always a need for your talent in this career, whether it be on set, doing makeup, in the lab, doing a mold, sculpting, making eyelashes, doing hair work, punching hair. There's always a need for technicians, artists in labs and doing things. And make sure it's really what you want to do, because this profession is very difficult. There's a lot of competition in this business. Find something you're good at and do it. But if you want to do makeup and you want to do everything, do it to the best of your ability, and practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect. It's an old saying, but it's so true, and you've got to devote your life to this profession, because if you don't and think it's a fly-by-night thing, I'll do that, I'll go out and party. Of course, those times you've got to do that, but you need to focus on what you want to do. And if you want to do makeup effects, doing a makeup, whatever, do that, but do it to the best of your ability and really get into it. Because if you don't get into it, then you're not going to make it. You need to really focus on what you're going to do and really want to do it. I have so many young people come up to me, oh, I really like to do makeup. I said, do you really like to do makeup?
Do you really, really, really want to?
Really, really, really want to do
Yeah.
it, or did you just kind of? Is it a fluke? Is it a hobby? You know, my parents always thought it was a hobby until I did. They came out to see me, and I got a call from a travel agency because I was working on a project with Orson Welles, and they were booking my flight. And I hung the phone up, and my parents looked at me, and I said, "Yeah, that was Orson. I'm going to do Orson Welles." Oh, and I think that's when the light came off on their head. Okay, so he's serious about
He's for real.
you know, he's for real. I think this is what he wants to do. So, and when I won the Academy Award, my mom and dad were watching television, of course, and the first phone call my dad got was from the API, Associated Press News, and they wanted to interview him about his son winning the Academy Award. And I have two older brothers and an older sister and a younger sister. And he said, Matthew is my youngest son, but today he's number one, you know, because, you know, and that was very kind.
That's awesome. That. Oh man.
Yeah, it was really great. But getting back to that, I mean, you have to enjoy what you're doing, number one. And number two, you really have to do it. You know, you're going to have failures, but you pick yourself up and you look at that failure and you go, okay, what did I do wrong? Don't just get mad and throw things around. Just, what did I do wrong? What could I do better the next time? You know, it's always the next time, because you have a next time, you know. And the other thing with social media these days, it's very difficult. I mean, I'm not even on Facebook. I don't like that, because I don't like the chatter in between people, because it gets you in trouble, you know. And that's another thing. If you go to the set or you go to work, you do your job, and you go home. Don't fraternize too much. You know, sometimes it's not good to fraternize with people you work with. You know, that's your profession, and then this is your social life.
Right.
And I always did that in my career, and I think it did me pretty well, because I didn't give anybody anything to talk about me. You know,
right.
I went in, I did the job, and I left. Made sure it was right. And I'd leave at the end of the day, you know, and then come back in and do the job and do it right. Don't talk about other people, and do it right. And it did me well. So there's a lesson to be learned with that.
Yeah, take the studio out of your home, out of your garage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I imagine that would be hard too, to not like gossip, especially when you get to spend so much time with like the actors. You know what I mean? Like you said, sometimes they don't want to talk, but I'm sure sometimes they do.
They do, and you listen.
But you don't be a therapist.
And you don't be a therapist. And you don't give them any advice. Well, you know. Don't give them any advice or anything, and just be there to listen to.
Right.
A lot of makeup artists get in too deep with actors, and that's a problem, because, you know, tomorrow you might not be there. You know, it may be the next best thing that they want. You know, the next best person they want. So take each day at a time and do your best job, and you know, you're going to make it.
Absolutely. Well, we are running short on time, and your IMDb list is huge. Like, you could either decide to like read Moby Dick, or we could check out your IMDb list. And I mean, there's so many movies that I wanted to ask you about, like Schindler's List, Edward Scissorhands, The X-Files. Let me ask about one though.
Yes. Okay.
Safety Not Guaranteed, because that's one of my favorite movies of all time. What was that experience like? Because it's so interesting, because there's all these movies that you don't think about makeup, or you don't think about prosthetics. You know what I mean?
I think I did the cut off ear in that.
Oh yeah, I didn't even remember that. Yeah.
So you know, a lot of these films that I've worked on, they come to me and only need one thing. Or meet me as a vendor, and I'd just supply the prosthetic for the makeup artist on the set. You know, as a makeup effects place, you have a lot of makeup artists calling you and say, well, I need this cut. I need this effect done. Well, that was one of those projects, that's what they needed done. So the actor came in, I met with him, I talked to the director on the phone, we're going to make this prosthetic. I know the makeup artist on the set's going to apply it. I know she's going to do a good job, et cetera, et cetera. So that was one of those projects that was just, we were a supplier of makeup effects or a prosthetic. So I didn't necessarily go on the set for that, but it was one of those projects,
Added to your list.
That's right.
Very cool.
That's right. And so these days, what I'm doing, I've closed my lab in Los Angeles and I've moved to Austin, Texas, and set up a studio in an old police station, and it still has a holding jail in it.
Whoa.
So it's all good.
Do you have any bodies in there?
Not yet. I'm going to
Cool.
set that up as a display. So
That's awesome.
But I'm getting back to, I'm helping Jim Glavin with the new edition. He's doing a new edition of the Richard Corson stage makeup book, which I was honored to have something to do with about 17 years ago when he did another edition of it. But now he's doing the 11th edition, and I'm doing huge amount of step-by-step makeups for the book because they want all color pictures, and we've been doing that for the last month and a half, is taking actors and taking face cast and doing step-by-step. So that's a feather in my cap as far as I'm concerned. There's no money in it, but it's the prestige and it's giving back to a book that I learned from when I was 11 years old. So, and also doing another book for Tom Debrasini. He's doing another edition, and I'm doing a few step-by-steps for that. Tom Debrasini's book, Special Makeup Effects. So I'm busier than ever right now in my little Geppetto workshop.
That's awesome. Talk about full circle, man.
Yeah, it is.
That's so great. Oh, man. Well, the way we like to end it on this show is with the final push. And this is where I ask you to kind of reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Well, again, just follow your passion and enjoy what you do, because life is way too short to not do what you want to do. If you want to do makeups and you're creative, and you just want to do it on your own, do it. But do something you're passionate about and love what you do.
Excellent, man. I'm shaking my head in agreement. I completely agree, man. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like you said, maybe we will have you on again to talk about some of your other work. So don't add too much more to the IMDb list, okay?
I'll try not to.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, man, it was a pleasure. And you can find Matthew on his website, which is wmcreationsinc.com. And we'll have that linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Matthew Mungle. Matthew, thanks again, man.
Thank you so much.
So much fun to talk with Matthew. I really do hope to have him on because, again, if you have not checked out his IMDb page, the list runs deep. It goes so deep. So definitely check that out. There's so many more questions that I have for him about some of the specific projects that he worked on that I really wanted to geek out on. But I think it's really important to go back to his 60-40 rule. And I think when you're working with other people, no matter what your creative thing is, I think he got those numbers right. I think 60% really is all about working with people and listening and being kind and just doing your job. And the other 40% is your talent. And I think that's inspiring for a lot of people that are looking to get into certain fields, whether it's makeup or special effects or something different, because it shows that it's weighted in being a good person, in being a committed person, and in being a hardworking person that is striving to achieve your goals. Again, those goals of doing what you really love, like Matthew is talking about. Being talented is wonderful, and of course, all of you are so talented in what you do, but a bigger section of that pie is devoted to your heart, your drive, your desire, and also just your overall human capacity for creativity. Natural talent will get you places, but it will only get you so far. What's going to get you to your ultimate goal is maintaining that focus on that goal. And as you keep going towards that goal, being a positive person, being a kind person, and being able to work well with others. And of course, along your journey, you're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes, but don't get hung up on them. Like Matthew said, find a way to learn from them. Look at them as an opportunity for you to never make that mistake again, for you to learn what you did wrong, and to get better as a result, and to see that as the victory. The mistakes are coming, I'm sorry to tell you, but it's just how you handle those mistakes and how you turn them into a positive that is going to get you closer and closer to that goal. And again, just wanted to mention Matthew's website is wmcreationsinc.com. I said in the interview, it might have sounded like INK, but it's INC. So wmcreationsinc, like incorporated, .com. On our next episode, we have the legendary tattoo artist Freddie Negretti. Freddie is best known for pioneering the black and gray tattoo style, and he honed that craft while serving time in a series of correctional facilities during his youth, which was riddled with abuse, gang life, and drug addiction. And Freddie comes on for an awesome and powerful episode to tell us about his story, how he got to the point that he is today, and the lessons that he learned along the way and that he is still learning now. He also has a new book out called Smile Now, Cry Later, Guns, Gangs, and Tattoos, My Life in Black and Gray. We talk about that at length as well. If you want to find out more about Freddie, you can find him on Instagram. He is Freddie_Negretti, FREDDY_NEGRETE. Or we'll have that as well as everything we talked about today with Matthew linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/267. But that is all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done, so go and get it done, and we'll be here for you next time if you need the push again. I love you all so much. Go get some amazing work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.